Hi everybody, Alex here with another image review session. This is the fourth, I think, of the six review sessions looking at my first pass through my very productive trip to Canada in September, October 2025. And this folder, as you might be guessing, is the folder of fish pictures. So we'll run through, there's 42 here, so I'll try and go through them reasonably quickly. You might, well, if you want to see other types of pictures, obviously there's been 3 videos already in this series and there's a couple more to come. So kicking this off, this beautiful fish here, as always, you can see, particularly if you view this on full screen on a high resolution screen, you know, sort of a big iPad or a laptop, you can read all the camera settings on the right hand side. But all these images are also on my website, so you can go on my website and get all the EXIF data from there as well. If you just type Canada or newest images, if you're watching this around the time that this video is new, they'll come straight up. If you type Canada at any other time, you should find these images pretty quickly. Right, our first image is of this beautiful China rockfish. Really handsome looking fish. This one here shot with MFO3 on the 90mm. They're quite large fish, the China rockfish. Relatives, sort of distant relatives, are scorpion fish actually, but they're free swimming rockfish. And there, this is just a nice portrait of this handsome fish. I like the background. I think it's more interesting having this kind of reefy background than just on pure black, particularly as parts of this fish are black and they would kind of blend away. So I like this shot with it in its environment. It's just a standard fish portrait, but it's such a pretty fish. I think the picture works very nicely. Then I found this moss head warbonnet living in a hole in a lovely yellow sponge. And this made for excellent pictures. I shot various angles on it. I never quite got it really looking at me with both eyes. Here it's looking at me almost with both eyes, but not quite. But I like this shot, and I like this shot as well, where it's a little bit more sideways on, and a little bit more feeling like you're observing the animal living its life rather than it really just staring down the barrel of the lens. But I like both shots. They're probably both taken on the same set, f8, f9. The 2 pictures, ISO 100 1/250th, shot with the Tamron 90mm and the MFO1 lens, so just which I use for pretty much all my macro, unless I want the wider view of the MFO3. Right, some other fish pictures. These are juvenile rockfish in amongst a seagrass meadow, and it was quite fun. I was trying to get these 2 blades to line up in the foreground and be silhouetted, and actually, as easy as that might sound, actually I really struggled to get exactly what I wanted. So they're not quite symmetrical in this shot, and that was the intention, for them to be symmetrical. But the shots where they were symmetrical, they would sometimes the top would catch the strobe light and I wouldn't get the silhouette. So anyway, that's the best of the pictures. And obviously other shots, the rockfish weren't as neatly arranged and all that sort of thing. So I like this shot. It's not got that feeling of being a perfect moment with superb symmetry or something like that, but I still like it. It's a nice storytelling image. The silhouetted seagrass in the foreground kind of invites you into the image, and then obviously there's lots of depth and layers through the seagrass meadow. A female kelp greenling sitting on the reef. The kelp greenlings, they always sit on nice bits of the reef, but they're not always easy to approach, and as you get close to them they often spook just as you begin to get into photographic range. I think this was shot with the FCP, and that zoomability here, zoomed in at 55mm of the 60mm, gave me the ability to fill the frame from a little bit further away and take this shot of her on the edge of the reef there. Some more juvenile rockfish, this time in amongst a kelp forest. I remember these being quite long exposures, 40th of a second at ISO 1000 to get the light coming through the kelp forest and just to open up that feeling of space behind the fish. And then for me, it was just a case of me staying still and waiting for the fish to start to swim back towards me. Probably originally having retreated away from me, they were now coming back to where they were originally, and then that gave me the chance, if I just stayed calm and still, the fish would come onto the camera. And I like the fact that the fish are reasonably neat. They're coming towards the camera in this respect, in this picture, and that just gives a nice energy to the shot. This great beast was a large lingcod. Lingcod are not that common in Browning Pass in the God's Pocket area, but when you do get them there, they do tend to be really big, impressive individuals. And yeah, their faces look rather like that of a sort of a grouper, really. I always think lots of teeth in the mouth, kind of very grouper-like eye and dorsal fin and pectoral fins, but they're much more elongated than that. If you imagine a kind of a stretched out grouper, you get quite close to what a lingcod looks like. And this one here, I like the fact that it was sort of surrounded by this barnacle-covered rock it was sitting on, and then behind it with all these plumos and enemies, but all pretty much in white. And I like that situation with this fish sitting in the middle of all the white. This shot also with the FCP, but zoomed in again, right to 60mm. Giving me that nice tight framing, which I really liked, and I really enjoyed the flexibility of the FCP, as these next two shots show. I mean, they're the same fish, same scene, but shot at different zooms, and yield two quite different pictures, really. But yeah, so I like that, and that's a copper rockfish over the plumos and enemies. Another lingcod here, shot with zoom blur, so zooming the lens during the exposure to create these radiating blur lines at the top of the frame where there's ambient light, and obviously because there's very little ambient light at the bottom of the frame, it's all nice and sharp. I did this really just because the picture just was a bit empty. I couldn't really get any closer to the lingcod than this, and there wasn't really any nice scenery around it like the previous lingcod. So I did the zoom blur here just to liven up that bit of the frame, because I did like the fact that this lingcod was sitting on this lovely pink coral, or pink coralline algae covered rock, which I thought was really nice. And again, great teeth, they're really cool. They've got very characterful, beautiful eyes with that kind of very, very deep blue colour in the eye, and then surrounded by the golden yellowy ring. Now we're into the world of rock greenling. Rock greenling aren't a common fish in this part of the world, but this particular trip there were lots of them, or relatively lots of them, at least 3 or 4 that we knew where they were. And typically the males set up territories in very shallow water, presumably to mate. And you can't see their eggs, so I don't know whether they're sitting on eggs you can't see, or I've just not learnt how to recognise the eggs, or whatever. But they're in very shallow water, so top metre of the water, if that. So you're right up in the shallows photographing them, and it's often very surgy where they are, which makes the photos really quite a lot of fun, because you can't stay still, and they're flying about, and the seaweed's flying about, and you get the fish posing, and then all the seaweed comes in front of your lens, and then the seaweed lifts up, and the fish is gone, and it's a lot of fun. Anyway, the male rock greenling is this one here. And he's very, very beautiful. These amazing patterns. They're quite a big fish as well. It doesn't always look so in these pictures, but they're big and they're colourful and they're beautiful. And they're reasonably friendly. They don't sit there posing for you, but because they're territorial, they come back to the same spot again and again, so you get the chance to shoot them. But the environment they live in, it's very surgy. And so I just embraced that with these pictures and used these longer exposures to let the seaweed just whip away in the background and create these movements. The reason I didn't show this picture first is this is a much more rarely seen female. You can see she's brown, but she's got those same little tufts above her eye that you can see in some of these shots of the male. Not very well actually because of the blur, but there's little tufts above the eye, which is characteristic of this species. And then this is the female coloration, that she's kind of this golden colour. And she was again sitting up on this coralline algae up in the shallows. Actually, I was in this position not to photograph her, but if you look just behind her, there's actually a red Irish lord camouflaged in the background there. And that's who I was actually in this area trying to photograph, and suddenly she popped into my picture. And so I took her picture, and then I took some more pictures of her afterwards. I've only processed one of them out in this initial pass of the images. I have obviously a lot of images to go through from this picture. So these are shot generally 1/10 of a second, so they're not really slow exposures. 1/10 isn't that slow, but the kelp was really whipping along, which is why this picture's got so much movement in it. This is a painted greenling, not the most exciting species in the area, but I like this one. I shot this with a very shallow depth of field, blurring out this busy background around him. But I like the fact that at first glance this just seems like a busy picture and you don't really see what you're looking at, and then you see the eye of the fish, and then you pick the outline of the fish out. So I quite like the way this picture works, and I tend not to process many pictures of painted greenling, so it was nice to get this one processed out. This is a decorated warbonnet. When I first went to Browning Pass, and I used to go diving with Todd and Rand and the guys, they were really into finding decorated warbonnets, and we'd always see a lot of them on the trips. Partly because the guys really focused on finding them, but I do think at that time there were more decorated wall bonnets. And I remember on those trips, we very rarely saw mosshead wall bonnets, but we'd always see decorated wall bonnets reasonably regularly. Whereas on this trip, I was seeing mosshead wall bonnets everywhere, 2 or 3 at most dives, but very rarely decorated wall bonnets. And these are 2 pictures of the same individual. This one taken, he was sitting in this hole, you could see in the yellow sponge, sitting in barnacle shells behind it. And I was just playing with different compositions, trying to work a bit of yellow sponge in. Here I could get a bit of yellow around the whole of the gap and have him in it, which I quite like. He's a very characterful looking fish. And then this one I went a bit tighter on him to get him a bit bigger in the frame, but still wanted some of that yellow. And so I placed him off center so I could get more yellow in the picture. It wasn't an easy shooting situation, I have to say. With them, we saw so few of them. This is a mosshead wall bonnet, and there's actually 2 in this picture. And these were much more common during the trip. They've got, rather than kind of one big cirri on the top of their head, they've got this kind of whole they've got this whole kind of mane of cirri running down their back. This one is actually in the middle of showing off, and you can see he's I presume it's a male because males are the best at the typical show-offs. He's puffed out his chest, his chin here, and also his whole body is flared out, and all these eye spots running down his back are all also really showing off. And the reason he was doing this is there is another wall bonnet living in this bottle who was looking out at it, and you can just see the lips there right in the middle of the picture. You can see the lips of the second wall bonnet, but I couldn't get an angle where you could see both of them from. But yeah, he was displaying to this other one in the bottle, and I'm assuming that this one is a male and the one in the bottle is maybe a female, and he's busy trying to display to her, but I don't know. But that would be a sensible. It might be 2 males arguing over territory, it might be 2 females arguing over territory. Who knows, it could even be a female showing off to a male. I don't know with the moss heads, but I would expect it's a male showing off to a female there. There's some more wall bonnets coming up a bit further down. This is a vermilion rockfish, so it's a red species of rockfish. Very handsome, nice and easy to shoot, a bit like the China rockfish at the beginning. I did shoot them on the black, but I kind of like shooting them on the colour and the bright backgrounds. So this one here shot with a relatively open aperture and then framed against the colourful, life-filled rocks underwater, which I think makes for a nice background on this subject. So kind of a bit different from how you would normally shoot a fish, maybe trying to get it on a clean background, purposely embracing a busy background, but making it less busy with shallow depth of field. This is a male kelp greenling just down over the reef. This one was buzzing around this area, and I just stayed still and waited for it to keep swimming back to this area, and got this nice shot of it very close to the camera with its fins all splayed out like this with the reef. It wasn't the best bit of reef, but I like the shot. I like the fact that the kelp greenling is swimming, that the fins are all out. It looks really pretty, and he's nice with his big yellow eye and all that detail on him. Right. Another session with the rock greenling. This is a different rock greenling to the previous one, actually. The previous one was on a dive site called Seven Tree. This is on a one that the God's Pocket called Butter Tart. Other people call it Rock of Life. And this is the Rock of Life one. And this one was in a really nice situation. It had lovely pink coralline algae it was sitting on, the male. And then behind it you had both seagrass and seaweeds. So it was a really lovely little scene. But like all the others, everything moving at 100 miles an hour. So each shot, even though these are taken seconds apart, they look completely different as the kelp gets whooshed one way and then whooshed the other way. And I took a variety of shots of it. These are some panning shots as it was swimming around, just getting a bit of movement into the frame. This is shot at 1/8 of a second. They're all at 1/8. I don't always want the movement to come into the shots, but when it's this dark, you end up with quite long exposures. So movement is quite typical. And it's nice to get the movement shots, but you don't want all of them to be movement shots because, you're obviously fighting these long exposures. So it's quite nice to have some sharp shots as well. So this was, again, embracing the movement. And then these were ones where I was trying to not have too much movement going on, even though I'm using an equally long exposure. So just to get some variety in the portfolio. And these are shot with the FCP. So this one's zoomed in at 47. These are all the way out at 28. So you can get a bit of 20. That one is at 35 mil. That one is at 28 mil. That one's at 28, and then this one's at 47. So you really use, that's one of the things I really like about the FCP. You can get in front of a cool subject and produce quite a diverse little mini portfolio of it just by very quickly playing with that zoom length and just getting a variety of different shots. This is another moss head war bonnet out and about. You can see those eye spots on its back like the other one, but it's clearly not flaring them like that other one. This one had a nice red colour to it. Very pretty little fish. In a busy background. I would have loved this to have been in a clean background, and it was, you know, sort of tucked into a crevice, so there was no way of doing anything particularly interesting with the lighting to try to make it pop out from the background. And that it was kind of, but it's a nice picture of a nice fish in its scene. There wasn't really any pleasing surroundings, so I couldn't place it off center in an interesting way or anything like that. So yeah, it's an okay shot. I think it's quite a nice illustrative shot of a cool species, which is why I processed it out, but I don't think it's an amazing picture. This is another mosshead warbonnet. I said they were common on this trip. Again, living in a hole in a yellow sponge. He's quite a cute looking one if we zoom in on him. Looking right down the barrel of the camera. And I like this little scene, just looking into the sponge, which is, yeah, it was a cool subject to be able to work. Another mosshead warbonnet. This is the kind of the warbonnet section, I guess. Shot in the God's Pocket Bay, and this is shot with a snoot, as you can probably tell. And then this is exactly the same fish, just now shot with a long exposure to let the ambient light come in from behind the fish and create. And I've added some intentional camera movement, so I was moving the camera while shooting this to create a bit of blur on that background, because I didn't want the background to be distracting. So by using the snoot to light this and then just have ambient light lighting the background, that ambient light will blur with a bit of camera movement, and that's what I've done here. So that's at a 6.6 of a second, this shot here, and this is at 1/320th of a second. So nice black background there, and then letting the ambient light come in and moving the camera during the exposure to create movement. Another shot with the snoot, this time of a juvenile wolfeel. Beautiful, beautiful fish, juvenile wolfeels. Look at the patterns that they have on their body. Really, really nice. Really cool looking fish. And again, lighting him with a snoot. And then he was in a really ugly, seaweedy, mucky environment, but allowing the ambient light to take over that environment, moving the camera during the exposure, and that ugly environment actually becomes quite interesting texture with the pan shot. And this is the same individual taken moments apart on exactly the same settings, but just I was moving the camera a little bit more in this one, and it gave a completely different texture. And that's one of the things reasons I think quite a lot of us like using these blurring techniques, because they just give so much variety to the pictures. Two pictures taken, of the same subject using the same gear and I'm sure the same settings. 0.3 of a second, 0.3 of a second, f11. Nothing unusual settings wise, but completely different results. So that was really nice. This is another snooted shot of a different warbonnet inside a bottle, and this one again shot with a long exposure. I shot this obviously with a black background, and it's nice with the black background, but I just like allowing that ambient light to come in. I think the pinks and the purples of the bottle, of the coralline algae on the bottle, look great against that bluey green water. So I like that blue to come in, and I feel it's a bit more naturalistic than the simple snooted shot, which is very dramatic, but it's also a little bit artificial. So I usually enjoy shooting the snoot, but allowing artificial light, ambient light to come in at the same time. And yet another mossy head warbonnet. This one's got a great head of hair, and this is one that actually Dave Hicks passed on to me. I swapped it for a GPO with him, because we were both shooting really cool subjects on either side of the same rock, and he passed that one to me, and I passed the GPO to him. This is back on. This is one of the 7 tree kelp greenlings, male kelp greenling. This one, not quite as wild conditions with camera movement, although you can still see plenty of streaking of the backscatter in that shot. 25th of a second, so you can just see that's not a particularly slow exposure, but you can just see all the particles in the water being whizzed along during the composition, during the exposure, sorry. I like this shot though, nice kelp. The kelp's nice and understated. I like the feeling of the greenling in its environment in that shot. And then these final few pictures, which you can see are all of adult male wolfeel, are from a dive in Campbell River. We had a nice dive there where we went down to see was hoping to see a pair of Wolfiels, and we got this nice Wolfiel, and he actually even came out for a little bit, which was really nice. So I got quite a variety of shots. All these pictures are taken within a couple of minutes, and I was sharing them with other photographers, but within those few minutes was able to get a real variety of shots. So first of all, a nice vertical image of the male really coming out from the rock. I like this because you've got all the character of the male, but you've also got habitat around him, so it's a nice storytelling shot of that situation. Then a diver interaction shot. The Moriel, this diver Crystal, she knew this Wolfiel, so she gave him a little bit of encouragement to come out, and he came out right towards her. And I just grabbed this shot. It wasn't planned at all. She was just trying to get the Wolfiel to come out, and he whizzed out very quickly, and I just hit the shutter as he approached her. And it was quite nice for the two of them looking at each other. Obviously, a bit more planning, we could have set this shot up a little bit more nicely with maybe the action a bit more in the middle of the frame, but I wasn't expecting this. It wasn't planned, and I was happy enough to get something from it. Then he was out and about, so as you can see, all he's done here is just drop back to the seabed where he was, and I was able to get a couple of shots of him, one with his mouth open a bit, one with it closed, of just him on the seabed. And then he very quickly went back in his burrow, actually, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity. He sort of did this, and he turned around and went head first back in his burrow. Inside his burrow, he turned around, and then he popped back out head first again, and that's when I was able to get this shot. And then when he was sitting there with his head out of his burrow, I then did some shots with single strobe just to get something slightly moodier, and then also single strobe, but that single strobe fast shutter speed. So if we look at the settings on that one, that's at 1/125th of a second to get the dark background, and then here I've slowed it down to 1/10th of a second to let the ambient light in and to light up a bit more of the surroundings. So they're actually very similar shots, just the change of shutter speed has opened up all that space around him. And I also just angled the strobe. I mean, I moved the camera more than angling the strobe. So here the strobe was just catching him, and then that slight change of angle, it's now catching more of the reef as well. But it's just shot with a single strobe, this. Similar to how you might shoot a big frogfish. And yeah, so I was really happy to get all those shots of a nice adult male Wolfiel in just a few seconds. And also, because I was on the FCP, I had a lot of variation in the shots. So this one is at 42mm, this is at 28mm, 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 43mm, 40mm, 32mm. So I'm zooming in and out, and within a relatively short period of time, getting a real variety of images of the same individual that I think is really valuable for me as a photographer. So hopefully that was an interesting run through. As I said, if you wanted to see any of the camera settings in more detail, these pictures are all on my website, and I'll be back again soon with some more Canada pictures.